Hey, Soul Stories fam, we're about to begin a brand new love journey. That morning, the faint scent of burnt cinnamon still lingered in the air, even though the oven had been off for over an hour. Haley wiped down the baking tray for the third time, just to keep her hands busy. Outside, the coastal street was waking up, the breeze carrying the taste of salt and a few leftover drops of dew on the window glass. The open sign hung slightly crooked, much like her monthly numbers tilting toward a side she didn't want to see. Rent 7 days overdue, flour, butter, and sugar bills stacked behind the counter. Her phone buzzed on the window ledge. Hannah, incoming call. The name alone made her chest tighten. Hey, Haley answered, her voice steady. Took you long enough. Hannah's tone was sharp, like a knife freshly honed. Simple favor. Tonight, 7 o'clock. The Lotus. You'll go in my place for a date. Haley looked down at her flour-dusted hands, pressing her lips together. Cousin, I'm a baker, not a table model or some display doll. Don't be dramatic. It's a client from the agency. His name's David Cole. You've probably heard of him, Cole Capital. Those investment deals in the papers. Millionaire, picky, quiet. I had him booked, but I just got a better offer. You go, sit there, smile modestly, don't babble. That's it. No. The word came too quickly, and suddenly her palms felt cold. I've got orders this afternoon. And besides the fact that your family still owes me, what exactly? Hannah sighed, the way only someone who enjoyed reminding you of a debt could. Think of it as paying back a little kindness. One evening, one dress, one presentable face. Done. Haley leaned against the wall, her gaze sliding to the expense list her mother had written in shaky handwriting. The old debt was a shadow stretching back to her parents' fights, her father leaving, and that winter when the bakery survived only on leftover cookies. She took a deep breath, forcing her voice not to crack. If he asks, I'll tell the truth, she said slowly, that I'm not who he was supposed to meet. I'm just a stand-in. Say whatever you want, just don't screw it up, Hannah threw back carelessly. 7 o'clock, the Lotus. And wear that navy blue dress. Please, no cupcake prints this time. The call ended like a slammed window on a windy day. Haley set her phone down and stood still for a long while. Her hand absent-mindedly adjusted the wind chime hanging by the door. The only thing she'd ever bought for herself after a good Christmas season. This bakery was the one piece of her life she didn't owe anyone for, except the bills, except the family debt, except the thank you she never got to say to her mother. She didn't believe in miracles. She believed in flour, yeast, and properly timed proofing, but this afternoon something in her chest had overproofed and turned sour. By sunset, Haley stood before the mirror in the small room behind the kitchen. The old blue dress from her closet was meant for weddings or the library's Children's Book Award ceremony. She slipped it on, zipped it up, and smoothed out the stubborn wrinkles. Her honey-colored hair, usually tied back for practicality, was half down tonight, pinned with a cheap pearl clip. She looked at herself. Not dazzling, not defeated. Just a woman who still knew how to stand tall. The Lotus glowed like a giant flower afloat in the city lights. The hostess smiled with the kind of politeness that came from seeing too many expensive things. Reservation under Mr. Cole? Yes, Haley replied, her heart hollowly thudding in her chest. She was led to a table by the window. The glass, napkins, and silverware looked so serious that they could have been part of an exam. She sat, placed her purse beside her, and told herself to breathe. Each passing minute stretched like pulled caramel. If he didn't show up, she'd leave, go home, turn on the oven, mix dough, and return to the life that smelled of butter and sugar. The revolving door opened. A man walked in, bringing with him a gentle kind of chill, not from the weather, but from someone who had long outgrown noise. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal suit so well cut there was nothing left to improve. His dark eyes were calm, the gaze of a man who'd seen too much to be surprised anymore. That gaze paused on Haley for a brief second, then he approached. Miss Hannah? Haley stood, gripping the edge of her napkin to stop her hands from shaking, then quickly let go so as not to wrinkle the linen. I'm not the person you were supposed to meet. A beat of silence, so real even the passing waiter seemed to walk quieter. He didn't raise an eyebrow or pull out his phone to cancel. Just the faintest movement at the corner of his mouth, as if remembering an old proverb. Good, he said, his voice deep and even. I wasn't planning to meet anyone. Then, Haley swallowed, I guess we can just have a normal dinner, he finished, pulling out her chair with effortless precision. Please sit. They sat across from each other. The dark wood table reflected her hands, thumb rubbing her index knuckle, her usual tell when she didn't know where to rest her eyes. She studied the menu. The names were long, and the ingredients were familiar from her kitchen, but dressed up in an aristocratic disguise. What do you do for a living? He asked, as if checking in for formality. I'm a baker, Haley said, eyes on the line reading yuzu lemon tartar. Small shop, 2 ovens, 1 mixer with a cracked lid but still running. I'm guessing, he looked at her, not mocking, just analyzing. You prefer recipes over feelings. Haley let out a small laugh. The opposite, actually. Recipes are just the tool. What I like is seeing someone's face when they take the first bite and forget the day was hard. Interesting, he paused, maybe surprised at the word coming out of his own mouth. I'm not someone who forgets easily. That must be good for you, Haley said, then added softly, almost to the table, and not so good for those who've disappointed you. A faint flicker crossed his eyes. The waiter returned to take their order. Haley chose the simplest dish she could read, plus water. David nodded for the steak, barely glancing at the menu. Hannah's my cousin, Haley said once her glass was set down. She had another engagement. I came only to repay a debt, he finished, no scorn in his tone, just an accurate guess. I figured. You did? Haley looked up, skeptical. People rarely sit up straight and admit I'm not who you expected unless they've been forced into honesty. He set his silverware down, fingers lacing together. I'm used to lies. Honesty is unusual. Haley chuckled, surprised by how light it sounded. Has anyone ever told you that even when you're polite, your voice makes people tremble? Yes, he said calmly. Others said it makes them angry. A little of both, Haley nodded. But that's okay. I have butter cookies for that. For the second time, his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but a thaw. Dinner went by slowly. They spoke less than the other tables, yet not with the rush of people fulfilling an obligation. Haley talked about the old oven she bought from a bankrupt store, about how cinnamon smelled better with ocean air than vanilla did, and about her mother's habit of drinking chamomile tea with honey. David listened more than he spoke, asking the occasional brief question, like stamps on her small stories. He didn't bring up his company or business deals, or words like valuation or profit. Those things glued to his name in the news. When did you know you wanted to open a bakery? He asked. The day I realized I couldn't stop baking even when the oven broke. The dough went bad, and all I had left was enough cash for a single bag of sugar, Haley said with a shy smile. Basically, when everything said don't, but my hands kept kneading. He watched her longer than usual. Brave. Stubborn, she corrected. Brave is what people call you once things turn out fine. When dessert arrived, a slice of lemon cake with a glossy white glaze, Haley nearly laughed, remembering some voice of etiquette whispering, don't critique the restaurant's cake like a professional. She took a forkful anyway, nodding. David didn't touch his. You don't eat sweets? She asked. I've learned to limit them. He lifted his water glass, his gaze brushing the cake as if it reminded him of something locked away. But I don't mind when others do. That sounds like someone watching life from behind glass, Haley blurted, then caught herself. Sorry, It's fine, he said quietly, setting the glass down. Maybe I've stood behind glass too long. Silence followed. Not heavy, but the kind where light slips through a new crack in the wall. When it was time to leave, Haley folded her napkin neatly, just as it had been. Thank you for the unusual dinner. Unusually good or unusually bad? He asked, not joking, but not cold either. Unusual, enough to remember. She smiled, hand on her purse strap. Then, unwilling to walk away in ambiguity, she met his eyes. I came because of an old debt, but the rest, I was myself. If that bothers you, I won't apologize. He looked at her long enough that she could hear her own heartbeat stutter, for reasons she couldn't name. And then, unexpectedly, the man known for keeping every door locked smiled. Not wide, not bright, just warm enough to be real. Thank you for not pretending, he said. Good night, Miss Monroe. Haley, she corrected softly. At my bakery, customers call me Haley. All right, he nodded. Good night, Haley. She turned first, walking through the golden-lit lobby, past the brass mirror that reflected her in the outdated blue dress. Outside, the sea breeze was cool. She pulled her thin scarf tighter and nearly laughed to herself. A strange night, a stranger man, and a smile that felt like the last ray of sunlight clinging to the doorframe. Inside the restaurant, David lingered for a few more seconds, looking at the now empty chair across from him. The waiter asked if he needed a car. He shook his head. Passing the dessert display, he paused briefly before a slice of lemon cake, the kind he didn't eat. He didn't buy it, just looked. Like a man realizing he wasn't truly hungry, but maybe still craved the taste of something forgotten. The dinner ended in quiet peculiarity and with a fleeting smile on the lips of a man who had forgotten how to smile. Somewhere between the scent of lemon and sugar, between "I'm not who you were expecting" and "good, I wasn't expecting anyone," a small sliver of light had opened. And as Haley walked away, she knew she had seen it. Just a little, but enough to remember. The morning in the seaside neighborhood was quieter than usual. Sunlight filtered through the bakery's curtains, scattering golden rays across the glass shelves where freshly baked croissants still steamed gently. Haley was taping up a newly arrived invoice when the bell over the door chimed. An older woman stepped inside, elegant posture, a gray cashmere coat, and a faint, refined perfume. The kind of scent worn only by those who had lived long enough to be quietly confident. "Excuse me," the woman began, her British accent smooth and low. "Are you Haley Monroe?" Haley looked up, slightly puzzled. "Yes, I am. Would you like to buy something, ma'am?" The woman smiled. "Not exactly. I came for something a bit more personal. I'm Margaret Cole." The frosting knife nearly slipped from Haley's hand. "Cole? As in Cole Capital?" Margaret nodded gently. "My son mentioned you. He doesn't mention people, ever." Haley froze. "He mentioned me?" Her mind instantly replayed that strange dinner. The curt words, the cool gaze, that fleeting smile that had vanished like an illusion. There was no way a man like him went home and told his mother he liked someone. But Margaret's eyes carried no weakness, only the quiet sorrow of a mother who had watched her son survive too many winters alone. "David isn't someone who opens up easily," she said softly, her tone low enough for only Haley to hear. "After what happened years ago, he chose to replace emotions with work. I don't blame him. Just pity him a little. You can live on reason all your life, but sooner or later, you'll feel the cold." Her gaze steadied on Haley's face, calm and direct. "I'm not asking you to heal him. No one can do that but himself. I just want someone who might remind him that not everything in life can, or should, be controlled." Haley stood silent. Something in those words made her heartbeat echo in her ears. Not out of pity, but from recognizing a rare kind of loneliness, the kind that exists in people who live only by discipline and the fear of loss. "I'm not sure I can do what you're hoping for," she said quietly, "but I can bring warmth to a kitchen and a hint of cinnamon." Margaret's lips curved into a soft smile. "Sometimes that's all it takes to melt the ice." Haley fell silent again, feeling as though someone had placed a secret in her hands she wasn't sure she was meant to keep. Finally, she nodded. "All right, I'll come. Just tell me the time, and if possible, I'd like to choose the ingredients myself." "Do it your way." Margaret took Haley's hand, warm and steady. "I already like you, Haley Monroe." By early afternoon, Haley arrived at the Cole estate. The black iron gates opened soundlessly, as though the house itself practiced good manners. Inside, the gardens were perfectly trimmed. The marble floors gleamed, everything pristine, almost too pristine, lacking a trace of human warmth. Margaret led her through the living room and stopped before a kitchen nearly as large as Haley's entire bakery. "Consider this your space," she said. "I'll leave you to it." Once she was gone, Haley took a deep breath and looked around, absorbing the quiet grandeur. Then soft footsteps behind her. "You again?" The voice was low and slightly hoarse, not cold but genuinely surprised. Haley turned, wiping her hands on her apron, her pulse catching when she saw him. The same frame, the same tailored suit, but not the restaurant version of him. Here, in the late afternoon light streaming through the windows, he looked closer. "I think that's my line," she said, half amused, half uncertain. "I was wondering the same thing." He glanced around the kitchen, where the scent of cinnamon had begun to bloom, then back at her. "My mother invited you?" Yes, I came to prepare pastries for her tea party. I didn't know you'd be home. I usually wouldn't be. He paused, eyes lingering on the tray of rising dough in the oven. But today, seems I picked the right day to stay. A brief silence passed, not awkward, just light and dusted with something unspoken, like sugar on pastry. Haley smiled, airy as the breeze outside. Well, let's hope the pastries are good enough to make up for the discomfort of seeing me again. David's voice was low, steady. I'm not uncomfortable, just surprised. I've never seen anyone make this kitchen feel warm before. Outside the window, sunlight tilted across the climbing rose vines, spilling into the space between them. And in that golden moment, Haley felt something unexpected. The strange realization that the cold, distant man from the other night, the one the world thought incapable of smiling, was standing close, quietly listening to the sound of dough rising, as if it echoed the rhythm of his own heart. Late afternoon sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, spilling a warm, golden band across the marble countertop. The scent of lemon and butter blended softly in the air, the kind of fragrance that made this cold house breathe for the first time. Haley stood beside Mrs. Margaret, showing her how to fold the batter so the soufflé would rise light and airy without collapsing. The older woman worked slowly, carefully, sometimes laughing at her own clumsiness. I never thought this house would smell this good again, she said. The scent comes from the heart, ma'am, Haley replied, her hands moving gently through the bowl. Dough only listens to happy people. Margaret chuckled, her eyes glinting with amusement. David was right. You have a way of talking that makes people forget they're tired. Haley looked up. He said that to you? He doesn't say much, Margaret smiled softly. But last night at dinner, he asked if I still had my old mixer. David hates cooking, Haley. If a man like him remembers a mixer, it means someone's taken root in his mind. Haley froze for half a second, the air between them charged with something unspoken. Before she could respond, the door behind her opened. David walked in, white shirt, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. The evening light caught his face, outlining the sharp calm of his features and the depth in his dark eyes, as though he'd been lost in thought. Mother, he said, voice low but even, you didn't have to do this. I already ordered dessert. Margaret turned, smiling gently. Ordered desserts can be good, David, but the ones you bake yourself, those are the ones people remember. He raised an eyebrow, his gaze finding Haley. You're still here. I promised Mrs. Cole I'd help her finish this batch, she said calmly. I don't like breaking promises. He said nothing. There was something in her tone, quiet, grounded, that left him without a reply. Haley bent over the bowl again, mixing the batter. The light glimmered over her hands, pale and dusted with flour. If you'd like to help, you can whisk the eggs, she murmured, not looking up. I'm not good at that. No one starts out good at anything. The words were simple, but they made him pause for a long time. David didn't touch the bowl. He only stood there watching her, each small movement, each calm breath, carrying a piece he didn't know he'd been missing. He'd lived in rooms far grander than this, surrounded by women far more glamorous, but no one had ever made him want to stay. When the first soufflé rose in the oven, Haley stood nearby, her eyes bright with quiet joy. She whispered, almost to herself, the heat's perfect. The glow from the oven cast warm light across her face, making it radiant, alive, real. David stood a few steps behind her, and for the first time he smiled. A small smile, fleeting but real, no pretense, no calculation. Margaret watched them, her gaze softening, fingers tightening around her teacup. She whispered to herself, afraid even her breath might break the fragile stillness of that moment. That girl, she's done what I never could. Mornings in the small seaside neighborhood always began with the soft chime of the bell at Butter and Bloom. Haley had grown used to that rhythm, the rush of air as the door opened, the footsteps of passers-by, and the scent of coffee mingling with melted butter. But this morning felt different. When she looked up, through the fogged window, a tall figure stood outside. David Cole. He wasn't in his usual suit. Instead, he wore dark khaki pants and a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, the collar slightly open, revealing a hint of his collarbone, and the restrained weariness of someone who rarely allowed himself to rest. The bell rang again as he stepped in. Good morning, he said, his voice deep and even. You're back? Haley asked, wiping down a tray of freshly baked pastries. I thought millionaires were always busy. I am, he said, his gaze lingering on the tray. But I needed to try the new item. It was the third time that week he'd come in, with the same excuse. Haley only smiled faintly. Today's special is lemon tart, but I'm afraid you might find it a bit too sour. That's all right, he said, his hands tucked in his pockets, a faint smile flickering across his lips, like sunlight glancing off the counter. I'm used to bitter things. Haley looked at him for a moment, then quietly poured him a cup of tea and slid it toward him. Then maybe try a bit of sweetness too. You might surprise yourself. He took a seat, letting his eyes wander around the cozy bakery. Everything was bathed in soft yellow light. The neatly stacked pastry shelves, the black and white photos of the old street on the walls. She sat across from him, cleaning the counter as they spoke. Do you always stay this guarded? She asked casually. David looked up, a sharpness flickering in his eyes before it softened again. You think I'm guarded? You never lean back in your chair. You keep your eyes on the door. And you never eat anything without checking the ingredients first. She shrugged. If that's not guarded, what is? A faint smile tugged at his lips, though his eyes dimmed slightly. Trust the wrong person once, he said quietly, and you learn how to keep every door locked. Haley paused, not saying anything. There was something in his tone, not bitterness exactly, but the echo of a door that had stayed shut for too long, now cracked open just enough for light to slip through. In the days that followed, he kept coming back, not regularly, but often enough for people to notice. Sometimes he sat by the window reading the newspaper, sometimes he simply watched her work. On certain afternoons, he brought his laptop, answering emails while sipping her coffee. Aren't you afraid your employees won't find you? She teased once. They probably already did, he replied dryly. They're just pretending not to know. She laughed. Oh, first time I met a CEO who hides from his office in a bakery. Don't tell anyone, he said with a half smile. I plan to make it a habit. His voice carried light humor, but in his eyes remained the quiet fatigue of a man who'd survived too many sleepless nights. One rainy afternoon, the shop was empty. Haley sat behind the counter, sifting flour for the next batch. The door opened. David stepped in, his hair damp, dark strands falling across his forehead. You came out in this weather? She asked. Had to try the new item, he said, looking out the rain-streaked window. Haley placed a cup of hot cocoa in front of him. You could skip a day. This rain's for remembering, not eating. He smiled faintly but didn't argue. She noticed his fingers brush the cup, hesitating as if afraid of the heat. A small gesture, but it softened something in her chest. After a quiet moment, he asked, Have you ever trusted someone and paid for it? Of course, she answered softly, but I guess I'm lucky. I still trust people, even after losing. He looked at her, his eyes as deep as a winter sea. I once had someone like that. She left the same day my company fell apart. No note, no goodbye. Haley stayed silent. Outside, the rain tapped against the glass, steady, rhythmic, like the breath of someone holding back tears. She said she loved me, David continued, his voice rougher now. But when everything collapsed, I realized what she loved wasn't me. It was the light around me. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his damp hair. Since then, I've learned to live in the shade. It's safer there. Haley didn't interrupt. She simply poured him more tea, setting the cup gently in front of him. The scent of lemon and honey drifted through the air, soft, comforting, like an unseen hand resting on an old wound. Thank you, he murmured, not looking at her. For the tea or the silence? Both. That night, after closing the bakery, Haley sat alone at the counter. She opened her recipe notebook, but instead of writing ingredients, she drew a small circle, a simple cupcake, with a single word written in soft cursive inside it, trust. She didn't know why she did it, only that something in his eyes had made her want to rebake what had long gone cold. The next morning, David came again. Haley said nothing. She simply placed a small cupcake before him, white frosting, perfectly smooth. On top, written in chocolate, were the words, sometimes wounds just need to be baked again, with trust. David stared at the cupcake for a long time. He didn't smile, didn't speak. The steam from his coffee curled upward, blurring the space between them like morning fog. At last, he asked quietly, do you always write messages on your pastries? Only when I think someone needs to read them. And you think I do? No, she said, her tone steady. I just think you deserve to be reminded that people can still believe again. Then she turned away, pretending to wipe the counter, avoiding the weight of his gaze. In that moment, David felt something stir in his chest, a faint ache, not of pain, but of a door inside him creaking open. He didn't touch the cupcake right away. When he left, he carried it with him in a small white box tied with a brown ribbon. Outside, the rain had started again. He watched the drops slide down the windshield, and for the first time in years, he let himself think of something he'd forbidden for too long. Maybe not every closed door was meant to stay locked. Some were just waiting for the right knock. That night, in the quiet corner of his penthouse office, David opened the box. The cupcake was still intact, the words still soft under the amber light. He cut a small piece, tasted it, and was surprised by the light tang of lemon blending with the sweetness of vanilla cream. Something melted inside him, like old ice beginning to crack. On the desk, the papers from his unfinished project lay under a faint golden glow. And there, in the silence of the night, the man who once believed he could never trust again sat alone, quietly eating a cupcake about trust and smiling. Soul Stories fam, if you're watching on another channel, come home to us at Soul Stories, where tens of thousands of listeners and sharers come together. That winter came earlier than usual. The small bay town seemed wrapped in a mist of gray cold, as if the entire world had drawn in a shiver. On the narrow streets, golden lamplight spilled onto the wet pavement, glimmering like ribbons of silk. Haley closed the bakery earlier than usual, cradling a woven basket filled with fresh bread and a jar of warm chicken soup. The air bit cold against her cheeks, yet her chest felt strangely warm. Mrs. Margaret had caught a mild cold. Haley had heard it from one of the Cole housekeepers. She hadn't thought much about it. She just did what she always did: chicken soup, cinnamon waffles, a touch of lemon honey, something to make the house less silent and the people inside it a little less lonely. When Haley stepped inside, the Cole kitchen glowed under soft amber light. Mrs. Margaret sat wrapped in a blanket, a little pale but smiling when she saw her. "Haley, my dear, what are you doing here in weather like this?" "If you don't eat something warm, your cold will never leave," Haley replied, removing her scarf and coat before setting the basket on the table. The scent of chicken broth filled the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of baked bread. Haley rolled up her sleeves, poured the soup into porcelain bowls, and added a few slices of waffle to the tray. She moved with ease, as if this kitchen were her own. Mrs. Margaret watched her with a fond gleam in her eyes. "I'm beginning to understand why David keeps visiting your bakery." Haley smiled, "Probably because he needs caffeine more than pastries." "Do you really think so?" Margaret asked, the question hanging lightly between them. Before Haley could answer, the front door opened. A rush of cold air swept in, along with the heavy, deliberate sound of footsteps. Haley turned, and her heart missed a beat. David stood at the doorway, snow dusting his dark overcoat, his face sharp from the wind. He stopped when he saw her, surprise flickering in his eyes. "What are you doing here?" His voice wasn't angry, just caught off guard. Haley straightened, still holding a wooden ladle in her hand, a streak of flour across her sleeve. "I heard Mrs. Cole wasn't feeling well, so I came to check on her. It's nothing serious, just a mild cold." He took off his gloves, unbuttoned his coat, and his breath still fogged with chill. "Thank you." Then, after a small pause, added, "I didn't think you'd drive in weather like this." "This town isn't that big," she said softly, and I owe her a few smiles. Mrs. Margaret chuckled. "See, David? Some people still understand the value of lending a smile." He said nothing, only glanced toward Haley. She was arranging the table, hair falling loosely over her shoulders, a few strands brushing the gray knit of her sweater. The lamplight caught in her honey-colored hair, making it glow. For a reason he couldn't name, his chest felt lighter. A little while later, the three of them sat around the table. Mrs. Margaret sipped her soup between stories, small, warm things. Winters passed, the year David refused to take medicine, the lonely Christmas tree in the garden last year with only one star because he'd been too busy to decorate it. Haley listened, smiling softly. She rose to fetch more bread, refilled tea, each movement unhurried and gentle. The air in the room warmed, not just from the fireplace, but from her presence. David watched her for a moment, then said in a tone halfway between teasing and truth, "You make my mother laugh more than her therapist ever could." Haley looked up. Maybe that's because pastries don't ask questions. The reply caught him off guard. For a breath, neither spoke. Outside, the wind howled and snow whispered against the windows, but in that kitchen, their breathing seemed to share the same rhythm, mingling with the scent of cinnamon, honey, and the faint steam of soup. After dinner, Mrs. Margaret went upstairs to rest. The house grew quiet again, lit only by the flicker of the fireplace and the soft clink of spoons on porcelain. Haley began clearing the table. David joined her, carrying the dishes to the sink. When she reached to wash them, he rolled up his sleeves and stepped beside her. "Let me help." "You don't have to. I want to." She turned slightly, ready to object, but the look in his eyes stopped her words. David Cole, the man who once said one betrayal is enough to lock every door, was now standing beside her, holding a dish towel as if it were the most serious job in the world. She laughed quietly. "You're terrible at this." His voice came back low and calm. "I wasn't hired to be good at drying dishes." "Then what are you good at?" He hesitated, eyes on the sink. "Before? I was good at living without needing anyone." Haley didn't respond. Soap bubbles slid over her hands, glistening in the firelight. After a moment, she murmured, still facing the sink, "That sounds like a sad skill." He stopped moving. For a while, only the wind outside filled the silence. Then softly he said, "Maybe it is." When the work was done, they stood together by the window. Snow blanketed the garden, glowing under the golden light from the back porch. She pulled at her sleeve, half smiling. "It's beautiful. But I doubt I'll be able to drive home tomorrow." He glanced at her, the corner of his mouth lifting. "If you can't, there's a spare room. And the fireplace is large enough." Haley laughed, trying to hide her fluster. "Thanks, but I'd rather not bring the smell of baked goods into your guest room." "My house can handle that smell," he said quietly. Then, after a pause, added, "It's been too long since it's had any scent at all." She froze, the laughter fading. Her eyes met his face lit by firelight, his gaze deep and still. No longer cold, just weary. And something else she didn't dare name. In that moment, in the middle of winter, in a kitchen that had known only silence, David Cole let his guard fall for just a breath. No words followed. Only a brief touch, when their hands brushed as they reached for the same, small, real, and warm, like an unspoken promise. Outside, wind whispered through the pines. Inside, the scent of cinnamon and honey lingered. And within them, both winter, at last, learned how to breathe in warmth. The days after the storm were clearer, yet inside Haley, the sky hadn't quite lifted. She still came to the Cole estate every weekend, partly at Mrs. Margaret's invitation, partly because she couldn't admit to herself how accustomed she'd grown to his presence. David wasn't as distant anymore, and he didn't speak much, but he often drifted to the kitchen with his laptop, sitting quietly at the wooden table by the window. Sometimes he only drank tea and watched her work. Even without words, something gentle stretched between them, a fragile calm that made people believe they were touching something warm, if only for a while. Haley never asked for more. She simply learned to live with the rhythm of him being there, the silence he carried, the way his eyes lingered on her hands, the rare curve of his lips when he smiled, as though he didn't mean to. That afternoon, she arrived early. Mrs. Margaret was resting, so only David was home. He opened the door himself, surprise flickering briefly before he composed his usual calm. "You're earlier than usual." "I brought a new recipe," she said, lifting the basket in her hand. "I wanted your mother to try it while it's still warm." "And me?" "That depends," she teased, "if you promise to lower your judgmental tone." A corner of his mouth lifted an expression rare and fleeting. "I'll try." In the kitchen, Haley began unpacking ingredients. David leaned against the counter, hands in his pockets, quietly watching. The afternoon light slanted through the tall windows, catching in her hair and turning it to spun gold. He realized something peculiar. Every time she was here, the house felt less hollow. The clink of spoons, the scent of vanilla, even her soft laughter. Each one made it easier to breathe. Somewhere along the way, he had grown used to looking for her presence. That evening, they had dinner with Mrs. Margaret. Afterward, when she retired upstairs, only the two of them remained in the living room. A pot of tea and a plate of pastries sat between them. The air was warm but too quiet. David was the first to break the silence. "You always bring something to this house. Bread, flowers, soup, or a smile. Doesn't it tire you?" Haley looked up, the hint of a smile still resting on her lips. "I don't think of it as bringing anything. I just do what I love." "Careful," he said slowly, his voice low. "People might mistake your kindness for something else." The words landed softly, but they hurt all the same. Her heart tightened, a small, invisible recoil. "Are you talking about people or about yourself?" He met her eyes, his gaze sharp as a mirror. "Don't misunderstand. I just appreciate your skill. Your pastries make my mother happy. That's all." The silence that followed was thick, heavy, and cold. His tone was steady, but his words cut like metal. Haley lowered her gaze, pressing her lips together. Part of her wanted to laugh, another part wanted to walk out, but instead she simply said very quietly, "Thank you. I understand." She didn't cry. She only gathered the tray of pastries, slow and deliberate, each motion measured by dignity. Before leaving, she paused by the door. "You know," she said softly, "people hide fear in 100 ways, but coldness is the easiest to recognize." David said nothing. The door closed behind her, leaving him alone in the hush of the room. The scent of sugar still lingered in the air, like the echo of words he hadn't dared to answer. That night, David couldn't sleep. He sat in his office, the lamp reflecting off a cup of tea gone cold. Her voice, her words, kept circling in his head. He knew he'd said the wrong thing, not because it wasn't true, but because it was only half true. He did appreciate her skill, but it was more than that. He admired the way she made everything come alive again. The way she looked straight into his guarded silence without flinching. And that, more than anything, terrified him. Betrayal had once destroyed his faith in others, but having someone make his heart beat again was what truly scared him. He had lived too long inside the safety of contracts, logic, and boundaries. And she had walked in like the scent of fresh dough before he could build another wall. The next morning, Mrs. Margaret noticed her son was quieter than usual. While sipping her tea, she said gently, as though making idle conversation, "Haley isn't coming by today?" "She's busy," he replied. "I see." She paused, then looked at him with the kind of gaze only a mother could give. One that saw even the things he tried hardest to hide. "You're so afraid of being hurt," she said softly, "that you've forgotten you're hurting others too." David looked up, his jaw tightening. "You don't understand." "Maybe I understand more than you think." She set her teacup down, her tone tender but firm. "When you lost your company, you lost faith in people. But ever since then, you've stopped believing in yourself too. You don't believe anyone could love you simply for being you." The words struck him like a tap on the surface of ice, soft, but enough to crack it. He didn't reply. He only turned toward the window, where the last of the snow was melting. The ground outside remained pale and damp like his heart, cold still but waiting perhaps for the first flower brave enough to bloom. Thursday afternoon, the last winter sunlight slanted through the bakery window, glinting off the golden loaves cooling on the rack. Haley was labeling boxes for late deliveries when the sharp click of heels broke the quiet. Fast, deliberate, and familiar. She looked up. Hannah stood in the doorway, elegance wrapped around her like armor, her smile a little too perfect to hide the blade behind it. "You've done well for yourself, Haley," Hannah said, arms folded. "Not only did you manage to pay part of your debt, but you also caught David Cole's attention." Haley's fingers tightened around the invoice in her hand. Her tone stayed calm. "What are you talking about?" Hannah took a few slow steps forward, each tap of her heel against the wood deliberate, like punctuation. "He's been coming here every week, hasn't he?" People are starting to talk. "You should know better. Men like him see love as an investment. When it profits, they keep it. When it doesn't, they cut their losses. You're just a trial run, that's all." Haley froze. "Don't say things you don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly." Hannah tilted her head, smiling thinly. "I've worked with men like him. They have a hobby, saving someone until they get bored. And let's not forget." Her voice dropped lower, slow and cutting. "Your family still owes mine. Don't lose both your dignity and your money, Haley." The words fell like the crack of ice. Haley didn't flinch. She only looked at her cousin, eyes steady, so steady that for a moment Hannah's own confidence wavered. "If you came to collect debt, I'll pay it. But if you came to poison what's left of my peace, then you came to the wrong place." Her voice was soft, but it cut clean. Hannah gave a brittle laugh, straightening her coat. "You've learned how to talk like someone hiding a broken heart." Then she turned and walked out, leaving behind the scent of jasmine perfume and an emptiness that hung like smoke. That night, the bakery closed early. Haley sat alone under the warm light, staring at the small table where David used to sit. The chair was still there, the teacup replaced, but the space itself carried a weight she couldn't name. She missed the quiet afternoons when he came in silent but somehow warm. She missed the way he smiled, barely enough to notice. She even missed the time he'd said, "Trust the wrong person once, and you'll learn to lock every door." Now she understood. He had locked the door long before she arrived. She had simply been naive enough to think kindness and sugar could pick the lock. He'd never said he cared, and she'd never asked. Maybe what they had was only a spark born from misunderstanding, burning too bright in silence. The next morning, Haley sent a message to Mrs. Margaret. "I'll need to pause my visits for a while. The bakery's in peak season. I'll keep sending pastries as usual." She read it once before pressing send. No explanation, no complaint. Just a quiet retreat. The only dignity she could still hold when her heart hadn't yet cooled. That afternoon at the Cole estate, Mrs. Margaret read the message, sat still for a long moment, then handed the phone to her son. David glanced at the screen, his voice flat. "She's busy, that's all." Mrs. Margaret looked at him, part surprise, part disappointment. "Do you know why she's not coming?" "I didn't do anything," he said. She set her teacup down gently, her voice soft but sharp. "Exactly. And that's why she has no reason to stay." David's head lifted slightly, his jaw tightening. "I didn't want to hurt her." "And you think silence doesn't hurt?" she asked quietly. "Sometimes indifference wounds more deeply than rejection ever could." He said nothing. Walking to the window, he watched the winter wind stirring the trees, the air carrying the faint scent of melted snow and wet pine. "What do you expect me to say?" he asked, his voice rough. "Anything real," she said simply. "Something that belongs to you, not to your fear." Then she left the room, her steps fading down the hall, leaving him alone with the echo of wind and a question he still couldn't answer. That night, he lay on the couch, staring up at the ceiling. Fragments of her came back in flashes, the loose strands of her hair, her hands dusted with flour, the gentle laugh that called him out for being clumsy. He exhaled slowly, and she once told him, "I don't believe in a recipe for happiness, but I believe in doing what feels right." And he, who had built a life on formulas, figures, and logic, finally understood. Doing nothing was still a choice. And silence, too, was an act of cowardice. Sometimes not speaking was the surest way to lose what mattered most. He stood and walked to his desk. There, a small white box sat untouched, the cupcake she'd once given him. He opened it. The cake had hardened with time, but the chocolate words were still visible. Sometimes wounds just need to be baked again, with trust. David brushed a thumb across the letters, his chest tightening. Maybe she was right. Maybe he was still afraid, but for the first time in years, fear didn't make him retreat. It made him want to do the opposite. Outside, the wind grew stronger, tossing the dry maple leaves against the window pane. In the stillness of the room, David Cole knew he wouldn't sleep that night. For the first time, he realized that peace no longer lived in silence. It lived in the woman who had chosen to walk away from it. Winter had not yet ended, but inside the Cole residence, the air felt colder than ever. Without Haley, the kitchen had returned to its former state, clean, orderly, and lifeless. No scent of cinnamon, no clinking of spoons or soft hum of her voice carrying through the wide room like a quiet heartbeat. Mrs. Margaret sat in the living room, hands clasped on her lap. David stood by the window, staring out at the garden veiled in mist. Since Haley stopped coming, he had grown quieter. No one asked questions, and he offered no explanations. "My son," Margaret said at last, her voice gentle but steady, "sometimes the strongest people are the ones who learn to forgive the past." David didn't turn around. His gaze remained fixed on the dim light filtering through the trees. "Forgiveness isn't easy, Mother." "No one said it was," she replied softly. "But holding on doesn't make you lighter." His jaw tightened, his fingers brushing the edge of the window frame. "If forgiveness means letting my guard down, I'd rather stay cold." Margaret looked at him with the heavy tenderness only a mother could have. "You think you're protecting yourself, David, but what you're really doing is punishing yourself. That girl brought light back into this house, and you—" her voice broke. "You chose to pull the curtains closed again." He stood still for a long time. Then finally he said quietly, "I didn't mean to hurt her." "But you did," she whispered, "with your silence." That evening, David returned to his study. The piles of documents still covered his desk, but he didn't touch them. The lamplight fell across a small note, one he'd kept inside the pastry box, its chocolate lettering long faded. He picked it up. The paper was slightly curled at the edges, faintly scented with vanilla. "Sometimes wounds just need to be baked again, with trust." He stared at the words until they blurred. "She trusted me," he murmured, "and I didn't." The sentence broke softly in the empty air. For the first time in years, David felt ashamed, not for the failures behind him, but for the fear that had kept him from reaching forward. He had mistaken caution for strength and silence for safety. Now, both felt like chains. The house, so wide and grand, seemed to echo with its own emptiness. As he walked down the staircase, the hallway lights reflected off the framed family portraits. One of them was recent, Margaret smiling warmly while he faced the camera with that polite, practiced half-smile of a man pretending to belong in his own life. He passed the kitchen. Haley's apron still hung by the counter, dusted faintly with flour. The vase of dried lavender she had arranged was drooping, its brittle petals scattered across the table like tiny fragments of time. David stopped there. The emptiness pressed in around him, each breath heavier than the last. He missed the sound of her laugh, the way she scolded him with gentleness when he was clumsy, saying, "Pastries don't ask questions." Now all that was left were questions with no one to answer them. Later that night, he stepped out into the garden. The pine tree still stood in the winter wind bare, silent but on its highest branch. The silver star Haley had hung at Christmas still shone faintly, tilted slightly under the soft glow of the house lights. He remembered her words that night. Every tree needs a star to remind it why it still stands through winter. Only now did he understand. He had stood for years, unyielding, upright, but had long forgotten the reason. People weren't meant to stand alone forever. David drew a breath. The cold air stung his lungs, carrying the scent of snow and damp pine. And in that quiet moment, he realized the house, like himself, was just a hollow shell without her warmth. Back inside, he opened his laptop. The screen's glow cast a pale reflection across his tired face. He clicked compose message to Haley Rivers, subject. His fingers hovered above the keys. He thought of writing an apology or perhaps something simpler. "How have you been?" But the only words that appeared were, "If you still believe wounds can be baked again with trust, I'm learning how to trust." He stared at it, then slowly he erased every word. He didn't send it. He couldn't. Because trust, once broken by fear, couldn't be rebuilt with logic. David closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair, eyes tracing the dark ceiling above him. A hollow ache spread through his chest, heavy, suffocating, and real. The night was still, and in that silence, the man who once believed he had everything finally understood what it meant to lose something that no amount of wealth could ever buy back. He looked toward the window, where the silver star still flickered faintly, and whispered, as if speaking to someone no longer there. "Haley, if you can forgive the past that built me, then maybe I can learn to forgive the man I became." A soft gust stirred the curtains. Moonlight swept across the floor, touching the note that still lay open on his desk. And inside the vast, empty house, the only sound left was that of a heart learning slowly, painfully to beat again. That morning, the first snow of the season began to fall. The city lay beneath a thin white hush, so still that even the sound of wind threading through rooftops felt sacred. Inside Butter and Bloom, the air was warm with the scent of cinnamon and butter. Haley wiped the counter, her hair falling in soft wisps, a dusting of flour glimmering against the strands like fallen snow. She turned on the oven, slid a tray of croissants inside, and smiled faintly to herself, a small, quiet smile that hid the ache still curled somewhere deep within her chest. Then the bell above the door chimed. She looked up and froze. David Cole stood there, framed in the pale morning light. Snow clung to his gray coat, his dark hair damp, his eyes carrying a changed kind of softness, not from comfort, but from surrender. The cold, distant air that once surrounded him was gone. What remained was a quiet, unguarded warmth that unsettled her heart. Haley gripped the towel in her hand, steadying herself. "I thought you didn't like sweets." David stepped closer, his voice low and rough, as though worn by too many sleepless nights. "I don't." He looked around the bakery, then added softly, "But I miss the smell of them here." Silence settled between them, tender, fragile. The faint crackle of the oven filled the air, like a heartbeat finding its rhythm again. Haley turned away, trying to hide the tremor in her breath, but then he spoke, a single line that stopped her cold. "You weren't the one I meant to meet that day." It was the same sentence that had begun everything between them. Only now it sounded different, stripped of pride, heavy with truth. He took another step forward, his gaze steady. "But you're the one I was meant to find." Haley's hand trembled slightly as she turned to face him. He looked thinner, older somehow, yet lighter too, as if he had finally laid down the weight he'd been carrying for years. "You came here to say that?" she asked, her voice careful, guarded. "I came to say that I was wrong," he said without hesitation. "I let fear make my choices for me. I thought silence was safety, but it only killed everything that could have lived. And you," his voice softened, "you reminded me that people only truly live when they dare to trust again." Haley's lips parted, but no words came. Only her heartbeat answered, quick and unsteady. "You're a little late," she whispered, smiling through the tremor. "I know," David said quietly. He took another step closer, and the space between them grew warm despite the cold air sneaking in through the door. "But this time, I'm not leaving it too late." For a moment, time seemed to hold still. The light spilled through the window, catching on the melting snow along his coat sleeve. He rested a hand lightly on the counter, the same place she had stood every day, the same place where he'd first realized that vanilla could carry a memory. "I won't promise to never make mistakes," he said, "but I'll promise never to meet pain with silence again. I need you to know that I missed you. Every day, every night." Haley looked at him, her eyes shimmering. "How many people have you said that to?" David smiled. The first real smile she'd seen from him in months. Only one, and she's standing right here. The oven chimed, ding, a sound that felt almost like laughter breaking through still air. The sweet smell of almonds and butter bloomed between them, rich and golden. Haley reached for a pastry, placed it gently on a porcelain plate, and held it out to him. "Same recipe." "I know," he said, taking it from her hands, "but I have a feeling it'll taste different this time." Her smile softened. "Why's that?" "Because the person who made it forgave me." She met his eyes then. The morning light poured through the frosted window, washing away the last trace of winter from his face. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic words, just two people who had once walked away from each other, standing quietly in the same warm room, letting their hearts recognize home. David took a bite. The pastry was warm and soft, with the faint spice of cinnamon lingering. He closed his eyes, a small breath catching in his chest. "I still don't like sweets," he murmured, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "But maybe I could learn. If they always taste like this." "Like what?" she asked, half laughing. "Like you." Haley's laughter rang out, light, pure, and full of life, the kind of sound that made the air itself turn gentle. Outside, snow kept falling. Inside, another batch of pastries began to bake, and this time, when the fire flickered across their faces, neither of them looked away. A week after that snowy morning, the sun finally returned. The streets, still damp from melted frost, shimmered beneath the soft gold of a late winter day. Inside Butter and Bloom, the air smelled of fresh pastry and something lighter, peace. Haley stood by the shop's doorway, chalk in hand, rewriting the little wooden sign she'd painted months ago. Beneath the shop's name, she added a new line in delicate white script. "Fresh beginnings, baked daily." She stepped back to look at it and smiled. It felt true. Slowly, gently, things were beginning again. The bell over the door chimed. She turned, and her heartbeat quickened, though by now she should have expected it. David stood there, sunlight glancing off his coat. In one hand, he carried a thick folder. In his eyes, there was a warmth so deep, it seemed to light the whole room. "Good morning," he said, voice steady but soft. "If you're here to buy every pastry again," she teased, "I'm warning you, I've raised the prices." A quiet laugh escaped him as he placed the folder on the counter. "I'm not here to buy," he said. "I'm here to build." Haley blinked. "Build?" He nudged the file toward her. The cover read, "Prescott Coal Ventures Expansion Proposal. Butter and Bloom." "I don't want to own this place," David said slowly, every word deliberate, unguarded. "I just want to be part of it." She flipped through the pages. Plans for new branches, workshops for children and retirees, apprenticeship programs for young bakers. There wasn't a single clause giving him ownership. Only one word repeated throughout the proposal: partnership. "Why?" she asked softly, eyes lifting to meet his. "Because for the first time in years," he said, "I want to belong somewhere, not with money, but with trust." The air fell still. Outside, a gentle breeze brushed past, setting the cookie-shaped wind chime by the door, swaying with a soft, tinkling sound, the one Mrs. Margaret had hung months ago. Something inside Haley melted, the thin layer of hesitation that had protected her for so long. And then David did something she didn't expect. He sank to one knee on the warm wooden floor, where the faint scent of butter still lingered. From his coat pocket, he pulled a small velvet box, not sleek or new, but worn smooth by years of touch. Inside lay a slender silver bracelet, its edges faintly dulled by time, yet gleaming in the morning light. "This was my mother's," he said quietly. "She wore it for 40 years. She used to tell me, happiness isn't in perfection. It's in choosing to stay, even when things stop being easy." When he looked up, there was no trace of the cold, guarded man she had first met. Only a steady, human warmth. "I can't promise you a perfect life," David said, his voice trembling just enough to be real. "But I can promise to stay through the imperfect parts. I won't run. Not from you, not from us." Haley stood motionless. A tear slid down her cheek, catching the light as it fell onto her flour-dusted fingers. She didn't even realize she was crying until her vision blurred. All the hurt, all the misunderstandings, all the long, silent winters of fear, dissolved like sugar melting into heat. Her hand trembled as she reached toward him. "Do you know," she whispered, "the first time I saw you smile, I thought, this man may have forgotten how to love, but he's never forgotten how to hope." He smiled, crooked, unpolished, utterly human. "And now you're the reason I remembered." She nodded, laughter trembling through her tears. "Then don't run again." He rose, slipping the bracelet onto her wrist. It hung a little loose, but when the sunlight caught it, the silver glowed bright and sure. A simple, steady promise. He kept her hand in his, warmth passing between them in silence. "If I could relive that first meeting," David said quietly, "I'd still show up late. Just to be sure the first person I saw when I walked through that door was you." Haley let out a shaky laugh. "You're terrible at flirting." "But I'm getting better at baking with you," he replied, and his voice was so gentle it almost broke her heart. The oven light flicked on again. They stood side by side, kneading dough, dusting cinnamon, watching as the pastries rose behind the glass. No grand words, no rehearsed vows, only the soft music of breath, laughter, and a silence that finally felt safe. On the shelf by the window, the wooden sign swayed slightly in the breeze. The chalk letters read, "Fresh beginnings baked daily." And just beneath it, in a new line, someone had written in a smaller, uneven hand, "And shared forever." Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought light enough for everything. The cherry trees outside the window had begun to bloom, scattering soft pink petals across the cobblestone street like powdered sugar. Sunlight filtered through the bakery windows, glinting off the brand new sign Haley had hung that morning. In white chalk, the words were simple and warm. "Today we bake for love." Haley stood back to admire it, a trace of flour still dusting her fingers. The little shop, once just a fragile dream, now stood whole, filled with laughter, warmth, and the smell of something always baking. Inside, the oven hummed softly. David was behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, trying on and failing to stir dough in a glass bowl with the seriousness of a man solving a business merger. Haley couldn't help laughing. "Are you making bread or building a wall?" He glanced up, mock offense in his voice. "It's called a long-term investment." "And what's the expected profit, Mr. Investor?" He smiled, that quiet, softened smile that always disarmed her. "You, if you're still here when the bread's ready?" Haley shook her head, laughing under her breath. Terrible answer. But her eyes gave her away. There was a gentleness there that came from knowing, truly knowing, she was home. She stepped closer, laid her hand over his, guiding him as they pressed and folded the soft dough together. The movement was slow, rhythmic, almost like breathing in unison. "See?" she said quietly. "The dough will never rise if you're too afraid to get it wrong." He looked at her, really looked, and something tender flickered behind his eyes. "I know," he murmured. "You taught me that." Flour clung to both their hands, their laughter blending with the golden light that streamed through the window. In that small space between them, the world was simple again. Just warmth, breath, and the faint scent of sugar and hope. In the corner, Mrs. Margaret sat by the window, a wool scarf around her shoulders and a cup of tea cradled in her hands. She watched the two of them, her smile quiet and knowing. "Well," she said softly, half to herself, "looks like sweetness has finally found its way home." Haley turned, grinning. "Would you like to try the new recipe, Mrs. Cole?" "If it's made with love," the older woman replied, "I'll try them all. Just don't let it burn." David chuckled, shaking his head, but there was emotion in his voice when he spoke. "I used to think the heart was a liability," he said, glancing at Haley. "Something that always cost more than it gave." He paused, his tone softening. "But maybe you're the only prophet I ever needed." Haley's eyes glimmered. "And you're the only reason I stopped being afraid to fail." They smiled at each other. No dramatics, no rehearsed lines. Just two people who had once broken in all the wrong places, now fitting together in all the right ones. When the pastries came out of the oven, the air filled with the scent of almonds and honey. David took a bite, frowned slightly. "A little too sweet," he said. Like you, Haley teased. A bit much sometimes, but still impossible to give up. He laughed, leaned down, and kissed her forehead. The taste of flour and vanilla lingered between them. Simple, real, perfectly enough. Outside, the new sign swung gently in the breeze, sunlight flickering off its chalk letters. Mrs. Margaret leaned back in her chair, eyes closing, a peaceful smile on her face. Inside the bakery, laughter mingled with the faint crackle of pastries cooling in the oven. It was the kind of ordinary moment most people would overlook, but for them it was everything. No diamond rings, no candlelit vows, just a wooden table, the warmth of buttered air, and two people who had finally stopped running. A soft breeze drifted through the open door, carrying the smell of fresh bread down the street. A group of children ran past, giggling, and one called out, "Miss Haley!" "Mr. David, what flavor is the cake today?" Haley smiled, her hands dusted with sugar. "It tastes like home," she said. David met her gaze and echoed softly, as though sealing a promise neither of them needed to speak aloud. "It tastes like home." Their laughter floated through the warm spring air, mingling with sunlight and the scent of something sweet rising in the oven. And in that small bakery on a quiet street, two imperfect people, once lost, once guarded, finally found what they'd been searching for all along. Not a perfect love, but a real one. A love steady enough to stay and warm enough to call home.